Welcome to Quantum RX, the podcast that teaches you how to move beyond stuck emotions and trauma for mind, body, and spirit healing. I'm your host, Dr. Stephanie Davis. So today I'm super excited for this episode because we are going to be integrating football, specifically college football, into a lesson that we can all learn from, and that is managing expectations. And you might, at first glance, you might not think that football has much to do with mindset, emotions, trauma, and all of that, but it really, really does. And so it's interesting because I grew up in a football family. I was born in South Bend, Indiana, and for those of you who are not familiar, that's where the University of Notre Dame is. And I was born into a family that loved Notre Dame, like incredibly, also because we were Irish, but also B, because strong ties to that area. My family that lives there is my mom's family and the last name Kennedy. So that tells you a lot about that. And so I always tell people that I was born blue and gold, but my heart bleeds scarlet and gray because I did the unthinkable when I was in undergrad and I went to Ohio State University, or as they always say, the Ohio State University, because that's actually what it says on the signs for the university. And so I am very impassioned about football. And it's interesting because there was a point in time when I was younger when I really wanted to pursue something in the realm of sports and sports. I don't know if it would have been broadcasting or sports media or reporting or something like that, but that was something after I had graduated and I had my jobs as a microbiologist and I was obviously very unfulfilled, that I was like, hey, that would be really cool to do. And ESPN, I remember, they ran a contest and it was basically to have for an ESPN anchor and to have a show. And the winner was Mike Hall, who went on to work at the Big Ten Network. And I remember this because I watched that show intently and I was just like, gosh, I would love to be one of those people. And so it's interesting because now I have a son that plays football and I get to see on a weekly basis all of the life lessons that come from football. But also when I was at Ohio State, I had friends one of them I actually grew up with my whole life, and he ended up going and playing for Ohio State. So I kind of had a front row seat to what happened in the football program there. And I still, I had friends who actually played. So I understood, not just as a fan, but also kind of some of what happened on the inside. So I feel like I've had a good, a front row seat. I've watched football since I was a little kid, so I understand the game. And I've always been fascinated by it, but I've always respected football and the fact that it's a hard sport to play. And it's hard physically, it's hard mentally, it's hard emotionally. So there really are a lot of crossovers. For those of you who are like, what is she talking about? This is where I'm going with all of this. And I really hope that you appreciate this aspect of the journey. And if you do, let me know, because I am going to be covering more content on this and marrying these areas together. And so I would love to hear about that from you all. But today, specifically, we're going to be talking about managing expectations, because that is something that we all have to learn to do on a daily basis in our lives. But in the football world, it is a spotlight. There's a spotlight on it. It's front and center. And you can see when teams, coaches, players are not managing their expectations, things start to crumble and things start to fall apart. And that is something that I find very, very interesting. And this season, particularly in the college football world, we're seeing that quite a bit, specifically with teams firing their head coaches. I'm not going to get into the nuance of all of that right now, but there have been a lot of major changes in the football world recently. There's money that has not been there before. The playing field is more level because of this money. Players are finally being compensated for their name, image, and likeness. There's a lot of things that are changing the landscape. There's also this thing called the transfer portal where guys can leave a team if they're unhappy and then go to a new one. And there really has not been a lot of, or there isn't anymore, even, any control around that. So they did close one portal window. So now there's only one. There were two. That made for a lot of chaos in the world. But yeah, we're going to talk about this. We're going to talk about managing expectations. And specifically, we are going to be talking about the Penn State Nittany Lion situation with their coach, James Franklin. And I encourage you to hear me out and listen to this episode, even if you're not a football fan, because the lessons will be coming through. This is just another vehicle to, portray what happens, in life when we don't manage expectations. So specifically, we are going to cover today what happens when you have expectations that don't match reality, the key to managing expectations, and what can we learn from, this specific examples in our real lives, in our daily lives. So that's what we're going to be covering today. If you're curious as to if you have any stored emotions or trauma that might be causing your illness, preventing you from achieving your goals, or even just showing up as the best, most authentic version of yourself, I invite you to take my free stored emotions and trauma quiz, and you will find that link in the show notes. All right, so let's get into this. So I gave you a little bit of a taster on, what was happening, that we're going to be talking about what happened with Penn State football this, about a week ago. Their head coach, James Franklin, got fired after, I believe it was 12 seasons with the program, and he was a winner. So people, you might be confused. Why was this guy who was largely very successful fired? And I maintain that it was because the alumni base and the, university, their expectations did not match reality. And what do I mean when I say this? I mean, this happens in our lives too, but I'm going to explain through the lens of football why this happened. So, like I said, he won lots of games, but he always had a hard time winning the big ones. And they would call him, kind of big game James, because he typically didn't beat the, stereotypical powers in the Big Ten, like Michigan and Ohio State, and some of the, more challenging teams, when they would get ranked high, or if they made it to, like last year, they had a playoff game and they ended up losing to Notre Dame. And so that he did not win those big games, but he made it there, right? He made it out of all of those teams that, there are, I want to say 130 some odd, teams that are in this pool. I can't remember exactly what it is, but there's 130 some, but I want to say it's between 130 and 140 teams. And they made it to the top 12, which is a pretty exceptional, feat in and of itself. It's really, really hard to do that. And so that's huge. If you're winning 9, 10, 11 games a season, there's no shame in that. That's actually a really good thing. He also, in the offseason, they go and lose to Notre Dame. In the offseason, they brought back a lot of their players because they had seen what Ohio State and Michigan had done the year before. Basically, what happened there was Michigan and Ohio State brought back a lot of guys who could have gone to the NFL, but instead they chose to come back and try to win a national championship. And they both did. And so they brought back a lot of their guys. They had a new defensive coordinator who was touted to be one of the best in the country. But they didn't think about the fact that, when you have a new defensive coordinator, he actually came from Ohio State and contributed to Ohio State winning that national championship. But he has a complex system. And even when he was at Ohio State, it took time to install. I think Penn State's expectation was that he was going to come in, install his defense, and then there was going to be a magic switch that was flipped, which is not the case because Ohio State struggled when he was first trying to install his defense. So there's that. There was a disconnect there. Another thing that happened with Penn State was they lost a game early in the season to ranked Oregon, which is a very, very good football team. And I think that was a pivotal moment because in that moment, you can either step up and be like, okay, it's one loss. We dropped to the ball, so to speak, but we can still keep doing this. Ohio State of last year was a great example. They lost 2 games during the regular season and ended up winning the whole thing. But there has to be a solid foundation there of belief, trust, love. There has to be all the right pieces of the puzzle to bring those, basically right those challenges, fix the problems, to be honest with each other, right? Those are things that I know had, it's been said and widely publicized that Ohio State had, kind of come to Jesus moments in the locker room and among the players and the coaches and the staff. And they had to take a really good look in the mirror and say, who am I? What do I stand for? I stand for my team. I stand for my brothers. I stand for things, and for them, notably faith, something bigger than themselves. They were all very strong in their faith as well. So that was all a piece of the puzzle. Now, I follow all football, particularly pay attention to the Big Ten, but I don't know what was happening on the inside of Penn State football. But I do know that James Franklin's a good coach. He's a good man and he cares about his players. You can just see how he handles himself when he's doing press conferences. He does not throw coaches or players under the bus. He owns his stuff, right? He takes ownership and responsibility. So there had to have been some kind of disconnect there. The next piece I feel like Penn State was a victim of the moment. They see, Indiana, who has historically been one of the worst football teams in, the history of college football, is now doing amazing. And so much of it is because of their new coach, Kurt Cignetti, and his coaching staff. That's a huge thing. And he brought in and installed an amazing culture, and he did it from day one. And so they're seeing what he did last year and this year. And then they saw earlier in the season, UCLA fire their head coach and then have a 180-degree turnaround and start winning all of their games. I think they were 0-4. They beat Penn State, and then they went 3-0 after that. So it's been a very interesting series of events. But like I said, when your expectations don't match your reality, you're going to have problems. And what was happening is Penn State probably believes that they are at another level than they actually are. And I'm going to say, and this is me just being a college football fan, they are not, kind of the big dogs. And that brings us to the next point. And I would say the key to managing expectations is to knowing who you are and being honest about it. So I would say, if we're going to say that the Big Ten is in, tiers, we're going to tier it out. The top dogs who have historically been strong powers are Ohio State, Michigan, USC, and in recent years has not been, but for a long time they were, and even Oregon. They haven't won the big game yet. The national championship is what I mean when I say that, but they're there. Then you have another tier of teams that whenever you see them on the schedule, you're like, oh my gosh, we're playing this team. And you have fear because they're always consistent. They're always good. They never give up, and they're going to fight till the very end. And there's going to be times when they beat you. And Penn State is one of these teams. Penn State has not been, and I know if anyone's listening to this and they are a fan, they're probably going to disagree, but they aren't a historic, massive power. They had a blip in time. I don't want to say it was a short blip because it was a long period of time, when Joe Paterno was the coach, and there's a whole set of baggage and can of worms that we're not going to talk about there. But they were they were a good, solid team. They are what I would consider a second tier team, like one of those really, really, really good, solid teams that's going to win, 9, 10, 11 games in a season, usually 10 or 11, but they might not win it all. But they're a good, solid team. And if they had set their sights on this level, and I'll get to this in a minute, like exceeding expectations, but that's where they are. That's who they are. They're there with, it's Penn State, it's Wisconsin, it's Iowa, it's teams like that. Even back in the day, I would say Northwestern had its moments when it could be like that. There are often teams in the Big Ten that kind of like cycle up. Historically, years past, sometimes even Purdue was there. I'm not saying that those teams are always there, but there's a good solid, even Washington, who's newer to the Big Ten, just like USC and Oregon and UCLA. Washington is always a good team that you're like, wow, this team is a team that could beat us. I mean, and I'm just saying what it is. There are teams who you historically would have seen on your schedule, like Indiana, and currently the current iteration of Purdue, you'd be like, oh, I know that's getting, it's an in-conference game, so it could always be tough, but likely we're going to win that game, right? So, and now Indiana's the opposite, right? Now Indiana's a powerhouse, and it's like that's what Penn State wanted. And I mean, the truth of the matter is that they did not. I still maintain that knowing who they didn't know who they were, right? They don't know who they are. They lost a great coach and a great person, and there were actually people who were upset. He went on ESPN this past weekend and, he I would say, handled an interview with Grace where they talked to him on the set of College Game Day about the loss of his job. And, he handled it beautifully. He did not dog Penn State. He did not say anything negative. He said, I'm still processing it. He said, I'm more concerned, not so much about himself and his family, even though it does affect them, but like all of the other people who it affects, all of his assistant coaches and their families, and all of the, that ripple effect that I often talk about, all of the other people he's connected to. So the truth is that another team is going to get a very wonderful coach when he gets hired, because he will be picked up very soon. And so that's what happens. Sometimes we make mistakes when our expectations are not aligned with reality. And that includes us as, human beings. I know I've had moments when I thought I could achieve something and it didn't pan out. And it was, my expectations, I was not seeing things clearly, right? Like sometimes, like I remember one time a while back, I launched a program, and that program, it was not nearly as successful. It was years back, maybe 3 or 4 years ago. And I had a few people sign up, but not many, even though I put so much time and effort and, blood, sweat, and tears into it. And the reason was because I was I would say truthfully, not 100% authentically aligned with myself. I felt like what I was going after was like the most low-hanging fruit, because it seemed easy, right? Instead of doing the hard thing. I was probably not completely aligned and using maybe the right language to attract the right people to the program. And also, like when you do stuff like this, like the energy of your message and the energy of what you're putting out, it resonates. People can read between the lines, even though if they're not consciously thinking it, they might, they are still picking up on it. And so I know that there were reasons. I thought it was great. It was like I had it all laid out. There were modules, there were videos to go with the modules, there were a simple worksheet to go with it. And I was like, oh, this is going to be awesome. And it wasn't. I thought I was going to start off with 8 to 10 people. And I started off with 4, one of which was a person who I asked to be present to kind of help moderate, because she had done some work with me before and programs with me before. So that was a case where I really needed to do a hard look inside and be like, why did this not work out? Was it systems? Not really. I actually had good systems in place, but it was me. It was everything going on inside of me that was not aligned and congruent with what I was, putting out there. So that was, a big learning lesson for me where my expectations did not match reality. And so that brings me to the last point of what can we learn? I basically just illustrated that, but it's being self-aware. When we're self-aware and we know who we are, we can go through the world and have adequate expectations, right? We know what to expect from ourselves. And does that mean that we should not strive for growth and exceed expectations and strive for excellence? No. But when we do that, you have to have a plan in place, I should say. Patience and grace. You need to have that plan so you have a path and a foundation. You need to have patience because it's not going to happen overnight. And you need to have grace with yourself and anyone else who's involved in that situation that, you're going to have challenges to work through because that is all parts of growth are bumpy, right? And so it's interesting because, maybe Penn State ends up hiring a new coach and it changes everything and the ship is righted for them. But I mean, we also may be here a year from now and that might not be the case. So it'll be interesting. And just being able to have foresight, being able to adjust course, because sometimes we get very rigid in our thoughts and our beliefs and our mindset, and we don't adjust course. I would say in life, the leaders I know, the people I know who are happy human beings, and even in college football, the coaches who have the most success are the ones who are the most flexible and willing to learn and willing to expand and be like, hey, this isn't working. Let's try this. They're also very, I would say, loving. They are there for a bigger purpose. They're there to, not for themselves, but they're there to be leaders of men, take boys and, cultivate them into solid men and solid human beings. So there's a lot that goes into that. And one last point I'm going to make about all of this stuff that we can learn. I mean, there are tons of lessons to learn, but ask for and take criticism. Constructive criticism. Don't ask somebody who's just going to dump on you, but ask a trusted person for some reflection. Like, hey, what could I do better? Or what are you seeing in me that's not showing me to be the best leader and best person that I am? And get that feedback and sit with it. See what resonates with you and what doesn't. Because as you know, in the previous episode, we talked about projection and reflection, right? And sometimes when you're in those conversations, people can project things onto you that are not really yours. So sit with it, trust your intuition, see what this person has to say. And like I always marinate in it. And I see like, is what this person's saying right? Is that, does it resonate? Because you have the option to take or leave whatever you want in every avenue of life. So I really wanted to do this episode, and it was interesting because one of the topics I had was managing expectations, and I felt like right now was an appropriate time to use an analogy from football because it really illustrates, the situation with Penn State really illustrates what happens, when we don't manage our expectations and, don't know who we are and those expectations don't match reality. And it provides a great platform for lessons for us to take from. And as always, sending you lots and lots of love until next time. If you made it this far, I truly appreciate you. Remember, knowledge is just the beginning. Taking action is what truly sparks change. If you're overwhelmed and don't have enough energy to make it through the day, I invite you to book a free 20-minute coaching call with me. It's a no-obligation chat where we can discuss your health goals and how I might be able to help you achieve them. Visit the link in the episode description to book that call. Until next time, keep striving for wellness and remember, you have the power to not just survive, but thrive in motherhood.